I'm Joe Getcho, and this is SpideyJoe's One Shots. Today I'll be covering Ms. Marvel Team-Up issues 1 through 6 from 2019, written by Eve Ewing and penciled by Joey Vazquez. This book is actually divided into two sections. The first section is a team-up with Spider-Man and Ms. Marvel, and the second section is a team-up with Captain Marvel and Ms. Marvel. Now, if you don't know who Ms. Marvel is, you don't need to worry. Check out our podcast episode of We Like Comics Because They Have No Bones for more information on Ms. Marvel. Also, don't forget to check out our after show that has additional history in it as well, and more discussion about the Disney Plus show. So there's actually something interesting depending on if you're reading the version online or if you're reading the physical book. Now, the physical book actually starts with Ms. Marvel's perspective and goes through there, whereas the version online from Marvel Unlimited or wherever you get your comics will actually show you from Peter Parker's perspective first. Now, the reason for this, well, spoiler, I'll get into it in a little bit, but it's an interesting distinction to note if you're planning to follow along. I'm actually going to be going off of the comic book version because I have it in my hands. So if you're going through the digital version, fret not, it'll all make sense in the end. This book starts off with a typical scene between Kamala and her family. She's just trying to comb her hair, but her Ami's upset that Kamala has been shirking her chores. This leads to Kamala being late for the school bus, but it's important that she makes it to school today because she's going with her class on a field trip to Empire State University, where the presentation is being given on some new technology that will allow researchers to capture neural activity, which consists of memories, personalities, thoughts, and store it remotely. So another story where you get to download yourself to the cloud. Enter Peter Parker, who's here to give an introduction to the guest speaker, which is actually pretty amazing, considering he was stripped of his doctoral degree for plagiarizing. To understand this, we need to talk about the Superior Spider-Man run from 2013 and 2014, where Dr. Otto Octavius, aka Dr. Octopus, swapped his consciousness with that of Peter Parker and left him in his dying body. Instead of continuing to be a villain, however, Otto becomes inspired and tries to be a better version of Spider-Man, or a superior version, so he starts a corporation called the Parker Foundation, writes a lot of papers, and creates new technologies. Then at the conclusion of that run, when Peter gets his body back, he's not as good at Otto at running the company, so he ends up going bankrupt, and it's later found out that all those papers that he wrote plagiarized the work of one Dr. Otto Octavius, which wasn't true. We know that because he was in his body at the time, but who else is going to believe that? So back to our story here, Peter is trying to get his life together, and he finds a way to introduce an old high school friend who is presenting this new technology. So naturally, when the Jackal shows up to steal this new technology, because, you know, that seems to be always what happens when you present new breakthroughs with minimal security, Spider-Man and Ms. Marvel are both there to save the day. Ms. Marvel goes to save the scientist, and Spider-Man takes care of the Jackal, but not before we find out that her technology actually has a failsafe from being put into the wrong hands. Good idea, but unfortunately it has a self-destruct mechanism. Peter, trying to get his confidence back, fiddles with it to try to defuse the bomb, but not before it explodes and somehow swaps the consciousness of Spider-Man and Ms. Marvel. So this is where something really cool happens with the actual physical book, where the rest of the pages are actually printed upside down. And what you're supposed to do is flip the book over and read it from back to front, which gives you the backstory of what Peter was doing and the events from his perspective that lead up to the explosion. Whereas in the digital version, it just starts with the Peter Parker angle and then goes into the Ms. Marvel later. So a little bit different. So unfortunately, not only is Peter's name tarnished, but he's having trouble finding work where he's qualified. While it's an honor to introduce his old high school friend, he's a little jealous and reflects on the decisions he's made up until this point. So this is an older version of Peter. So he makes a comment that things were simpler when he was younger, which his colleague disagrees with and says he wouldn't go back just based on the acne and swaggerlessness. The events play out the same in this version, although you get Peter's perspective, and that ends issue 1. In issue 2, we open with dialogue between our two heroes, but they seem to be coming from the wrong bodies. With no shyness or reservation, Kamala freaks out and runs to the closest mirror to find out who it is that she's inhabited, and learns that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. So naturally, Peter does the same in her body, taking off her mask to reveal that she is Kamala Khan, aka Miss Marvel. Due to the technology used to swap their consciousnesses, however, it's very unstable, and we find out that Peter actually had a chip implanted in the back of his head to prevent this sort of thing from happening again. But obviously it's malfunctioning. Our heroes need to get back to the people who are waiting on them, which gives us two of the best panels in this entire story. One where the heroes are in their typical poses, in the wrong body, and one where Peter thinks he knows how to use Kamala's abilities but fails miserably. There are a lot of really funny moments between Peter and Kamala's family, and some more random glitches, but they're not really too worried at the moment, because this actually seems to be a good thing. Kamala gets to be an independent adult and get some peace and quiet, while Peter can be young again and ace his way through school. But unfortunately, Peter collapses in a ball during Kamala's presentation because he feels like he's dying, to which Kamala tells him, yeah, welcome to being a teen girl. The duo go out and try to foil a robbery, but they end up foiling themselves because they can't control each other's powers. So with a little bit of practice, they start to get the hang of things, and we end the issue with finding out that the Jackal has abducted Yesenia, the doctor from earlier in our story, who created the consciousness swapping technology. In our final issue of Spider-Man and Ms. Marvel Team Up, the dynamic duo don their duds and put up their dukes to dash the Jackal, and Kamala gets an A+ for her newfound webbing skills. Several minutes later, and a very cheap pizza later, the duo explain their disaster to the good doctor, who runs some tests and basically comes up with nothing. But then Peter remembers the isotope genome accelerator from his tussles with the lizard and comes up with an idea to modify its settings to switch them back. But not without some risks, because they might not switch back, or they might lose their memories, or they might lose their powers. What's a little risk? But this is a very short team up. It's time for it to end, so in a one-page spread of electricity and sparkles, the switch back to their original bodies is captured in a second page, and all is well. The two say their goodbyes and go their separate ways, and don't notice the unintended side effect that they left behind. Kamala goes back to her family, enjoys a nice dinner, and Peter goes back to his apartment to play some video games with his roommate, like nothing ever happened. And that's a wrap on the Spider-Man and Ms. Marvel team-up from 2019. Don't forget to check out podcast episodes of We Like Comics Because They Have No Bones on anchor.fm/bonelesscomicspodcast. And check out our after shows and bonus content like the SpideyJoe's one-shots on our YouTube channel at tinyurl.com/bonelesscomicspodcast. Give us a like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to get the latest updates. Also, check us out on social media at TikTok, Instagram, and Facebook at Boneless Comics Podcast, and on Twitter at Boneless Comics 1. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll get you later.
Wherever there's a hang-up, you'll find the Spider-Man.